Alrighty then. Well, I'm getting ready to go into town, but before I do that, I want to tell a little story. I just put the garbage out a little while ago. I think I might have missed the pickup. I'm hoping I didn't because I don't want to be stuck with the garbage for another week. But I may have missed the pickup anyway. We'll see. Anyway, here's the thing. Here's the interesting thing. I've noticed something is through debating with the woke crowd, with the far left woke crowd on Facebook and so on, especially Facebook. Facebook has gotten to be a real place for the woke people. And what I've noticed is, I try to refrain from personal insults. I don't insult the people I get into these debates with about the whole transgender thing and the homosexual thing and different things like that, and about globalism, which they seem to be very much in favor of. I get debating with these people, and I make a point of not throwing out personal insults. I make a point of not wishing evil to come upon them. I try to stick to the facts, and I express my opinion about the situation without expressing any personal opinion about the person I'm talking to. So I don't tell the people that they're pieces of shit, or that they're vile, or that they deserve horrible things to happen to them, that they deserve prison, or they deserve to be executed or tortured. I don't wish that they be sent to prison and then violated sexually by another prisoner, or whatever. This is all stuff that I've had happen. No, I've had all this wished upon me, though, by them. And they'll turn around then and they'll say that people like me are hateful. In the meantime, they're the ones saying, I hope you get sent to prison for being being a vile, hateful bigot. And I hope when you're there that Bubba gets a hold of you and just shoves it right up your you-know-what. And this is what you get. I hope you get raped in prison and stuff. And it's like, look, I don't wish that on you. I think you're wrong. And I think your position is totally indefensible and that you're wrong. But I don't wish that sort of thing on you. Yet I'm the hateful one. Like, how much hate do you have to harbor in your heart to wish something like that upon somebody? And really, what I'm doing is, in these debates, I'm pointing out that it just doesn't make any sense. If you're going to seriously tell me that a man can have a menstrual period and a man can conceive a child and give birth to a child, I know enough about human anatomy to know that ain't happening. And so, and to say that a man can be a woman if he says he is, or a woman can be a man if she says she is, and we have to know everybody's preferred pronouns and use them, or we're hateful bigots, and on like that. No, that's all nonsense. And and saying that it's okay to give puberty blockers to teenagers and all that. You start messing around with nature, and you'll find out, you can't fool with God's creation. It'll come back on you in a multitude of ways. You may think you're getting away with it for a while, but it will come back on you. And now we are hearing stories from adults that were subjected to gene therapies and things like that, and to hormonal therapies and stuff. And now we're hearing the stories about all the health effects, all the negative health effects that come from that. So, I'm not coming from a place of ignorance, and I'm not coming from a place of hatred. I'm coming from a place of common sense. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter what it is. If you start interfering with nature, we think we're smart. Hey, we can interfere with nature. We can build something. We can build great things. And humanity has done that. And More than once it's happened, though, that nature has come in and completely wiped everything we built in an area off the map. They've said, nope, this don't exist here anymore. Nature has done that, and it's followed through by destroying the whole works. And some of the stuff nature destroys has been really impressive. Because humanity isn't stupid either. Humanity builds some pretty impressive stuff. But the thing is, we don't win when we go against nature. We really don't. We think we're going to win. We're not going to win. Not going against nature. And so, we can build a really impressive thing, and nature will come when there'll be a big wind or a tidal wave or some other such thing, and that thing will be gone just as if it was never there in the first place. And I'll tell you a story. My dad had a grade 10 education. He was a smart man. He was a tool and die maker and an industrial mechanic, and he could do a lot of things. He was not a stupid man, but he was by modern standards at least an uneducated man. And I mean, he was one of those guys. He liked beer, and he liked Clint Eastwood movies, and he liked fast cars with great big V8 engines in them. And that's how my dad was. He was a product of the 40s and 50s, and that's who my dad was. And yeah, my dad had kind of a vulgar sense of humor like I do. In fact, he was even worse. If you think I can be offensive, you should have heard some of the stuff he used to come out with. But the thing is, all that being said, that my dad was basically just a common, everyday working man of his time. Labatt's 50 beer and a bologna sandwich and a Clint Eastwood movie with Clyde the ape, Clyde the gorilla, or whatever, and he was rated his element, To him, that was a good Saturday afternoon. But my dad, he had common sense. And he had to. If he didn't have common sense, he'd have died. Because, when I was growing up, the world was still like that. If you were stupid, you didn't live very long, generally. You had a pretty bad time of it and you died. And I remember one time, I'm going down a street in the town of Perth, Ontario, called Drummond Street. This is my hometown, Perth. The street's called Drummond Street, and it's a street that runs right from one end of the town to the other. Runs right from Highway 7 straight through to Highway 10 at the other end of town. Anyway, we're driving along, and there was this place that had been a field. It had been a field and a forest is what it had been. There had been a small pasture there where sometimes you'd see horses, and most of it, though, was forest. And they cut all the forest down, and they had built a kind of a rudimentary road back through it, and they were building houses. Now, ultimately, what they did is they built a bunch of houses in there, and they built 2 apartment buildings on the same patch of land. And they made a street down there. It was like a dead-end street with a cul-de-sac type thing, a circle where you could turn around and come back out. And the street is called Dane's Place. That's the name of the street, Dane's Place. It's named after some old mayor or something from Perth years ago. Some fella whose last name was Danes. Anyway, street's called Dane's Place. Well, we were going past there when that was under construction back in like 1974. 75, somewhere like that. Anyway, we're riding in my dad's car. And I look and I said to my dad, they're building houses in there. They'd cut down the forest and they're building houses. Because I could see them digging foundations and they were pouring foundations and you could see the starts of houses, and I knew it. I knew the start of a house when I saw one, and my dad, he says, yes, they are. He said, that's right. They're building houses in there. And he said, I'm going to tell you something about those houses, though. He said, they will never have anything but trouble there with those houses. And I said, why is that? Well, he said, that's a swamp. And he said, it's always going to be a swamp. Like they backfilled it and everything. And, they can do all that, yes. But that'll always be a swamp because he said a swamp is supposed to be there. Nature has decided that there's to be a swamp there. And he said, you can't override a decision. When nature makes a decision, you can't just override it like that. So you can backfill that thing you can do a beautiful job backfilling it. You can make it look really good. And he said, when they're finished, it'll look really good. But he said, I guarantee you, they're going to have nothing but floods and just constant problems, foundation issues, floods, everything. He said, it's going to be bad. And he said, you couldn't give me one of those houses. If I was offered one of those houses free of charge, I wouldn't take it, he said, because I know the kind of trouble I would have with it, building it in a swamp. And he said, a swamp will always be a swamp, no matter how bad, it doesn't matter how you pretty it up, it'll always be a swamp. Doesn't matter what you do, it'll always be a swamp. And he said, those houses are being built in a fucking swamp. I remember my dad saying that. Now, fast forward a few years. I left home in 1983, boarded at a school teacher's place, and then when he left town, he and his family left town because he got a promotion, so he had to move to another town. And then I boarded at another place. Guess where I boarded? I boarded in one of those houses on Dane's Place. That's where I boarded. I was in one of those houses. Now, the house I was in wasn't too bad because of where it was. And we had a little trouble with flooding in the basement and stuff, but it wasn't too bad. But the houses further down, closer to the street, which was really the area where the swamp really was, those houses had constant problems with flooding. They had foundation issues. The people who owned those houses, it just never ended, the issues that they had with those houses. And I remembered my dad telling me, maybe 12 years before that, because it'd be around 1986 when I was living on Dane's Place, 86, 87, in there. And I remember my dad, I was about 18 years old, 18, I think, when I moved in there. And then I stayed there for a year or two, and then I rented an apartment of my own. But anyway, I remember when I was living there, having conversations with the neighbors and them complaining about all the flooding and that they were having foundation problems and this and that, and all the money it was going to cost them to get their house fixed, and that it was just a losing battle. They couldn't keep ahead of it. And I remembered that conversation I had with my dad so many years before. And I remembered his words. He said, it's a fucking swamp and it'll always be a fucking swamp. And I apologize, but that's how my dad talked. My dad used the F word as punctuation. So, like I say, he was the old style 1950s tough guy, working man, hard worker, would give you the shirt off his back. If he saw you were in trouble on the side of the road, he'd stop and help you. I seen him give food to the kids who were eating out of garbage cans. I saw him spend his last dollar on food to feed kids who were eating out of garbage cans and stuff. And he never talked about that. Unless you saw him do it, you'd never know he did it. But he did. And so, he wasn't a bad man. He had a violent streak. He had a bad temper. He liked his beer too much. But he was a hard worker, and he wasn't stupid. He was uneducated. And some would say even crude. He'd definitely be crude by modern standards. But he was not stupid. He had common sense. And I remember him telling me that. He said, you mess with nature, and you will pay. Like, nature says there's supposed to be a swamp there, and no matter how they pretty it up, it'll always be a swamp. And he was right. It didn't look like a swamp, but it was a swamp. And they had all the problems that you have when you build a house in a swamp. Anyway, The point of that story is that my dad knew back then that you don't mess with nature and get away with it. And it's the same thing. Look, if you're born in within a certain way, you're born in a certain body, you have certain parts, you have a certain genetic makeup, a certain chromosomal makeup, and so on. Well, whether you like it or not, that's what you are. That's who you are. That's what you are, and you can't change that. You can get all the surgeries and you can take all the hormones and everything. You can't change it. It is what it is. You can maybe outwardly change your appearance and stuff. Like, look, if you went to Dane's place now and you had no memory of what it was, like I do, you would never know that had been a swamp. It does not look like a swamp. And you could walk up and down that street and you'd have no idea you were walking through a swamp. Buy a house there and you'll find out in a hurry, because you'll have all these issues because they're built in a swamp. And I'm sure a lot of the people who own houses there these days are having those problems, and they have no idea why, because the memory of that swamp is long gone. Now, I could come along and say, well, it's because your house is in a swamp. They'd probably look at me and say, you're crazy. This ain't a swamp. What are you talking about? Look at the lawn here. You're calling this a swamp? But yes, it's a swamp. And it's just like my dad said, you can pretty it up all you want. It'll always be a swamp, because that is what nature has decided is going to be there. And that is what's going to be there, no matter how it looks outwardly. And it's the same thing. If nature decides you're going to have a penis hanging between your legs, and you're going to have a penis hanging between your legs. And even if you get it removed and turned into a female part, a vagina, it makes no difference. Well, it makes a difference, I guess, but, you still are what you are. You can't change that. They dig up your bones in 500 years, an archaeologist is going to put you down as whatever you were born as, not whatever the surgery made you appear to be outwardly. And so these are the things I point out. And then I got people saying you should be sent to prison and raped, and you should be killed, and, you should be tortured, and, they wish all these bad things upon me. It's like, I'm not doing that to them, yet they're calling me hateful. And the truth is, I'm not hateful. It breaks my heart to see what people are doing to themselves, and it breaks my heart to see how mental illness is now regarded as perfectly great. No, I don't think we should persecute the mentally ill. They don't deserve that. But I don't think that we should be calling mental illness a superpower either, like we do now, because it's not a superpower, it's a handicap. We should be doing all we can to help these people to lead as normal a life as possible, not pushing them even deeper into the mental illness. Look, if I see you about to stick your hand into a meat grinder, I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to say, hey, that's a meat grinder. Don't stick your hand in there. And if you persist in doing it, I might run up on you and pull your hand back. I might grab you and pull you back away from it. But what I'm not going to do is grab you and shove you into it. That's pretty much what's happening with this woke crowd now. They're taking people who are mentally ill, people who are vulnerable, and they're playing on those vulnerabilities, and then they're accusing any of us that called them out on it of being hateful. I'm not motivated by hate. I have no reason to hate these people, and I don't hate them. Biblically, of course, the Bible condemns certain practices and stuff, but I don't regard myself as the judge and the jury and the executioner. I regard myself as somebody who needs to use discernment, so I can't openly or even privately support certain practices, certain things. But that doesn't mean that I have a right to hate the people who practice those things, and it certainly doesn't mean that I have a right to take it upon myself to punish them. However, I am supposed to use discernment. I'm supposed to be aware that of what it is, that these people, that they're suffering from some sort of an illness, some sort of a mental and a spiritual illness, and they need our help, and they don't need the kind of help, it's like feeding an alcoholic alcohol or a drug addict drugs. The last thing a heroin addict needs is for you to give him heroin. A heroin addict may need you to hold his hand while he gets off the heroin. So you do that, you're showing the heroin addict love. You feed the addiction, and you're helping the heroin addict to kill himself, to destroy himself. That's not a loving act, even if you somehow convince yourself it is. It isn't. You may believe it is. You may believe it sincerely, but it isn't. You're not helping by doing that. Anyway, that's the bottom line. I'm saying all this stuff here because this is my channel, and I'll damn well say what I want to. But anyway, I do notice the contradiction, though, when they're telling me that I'm hateful and all the rest of it, and in the meantime, they're wishing all this bad stuff upon me because they disagree with me. And it's like, I'm not wishing all that on them. I'm not saying, I think you should. I'd love to see you hang. I'd love to see you put to death in the public square or whatever, I'll bring rotten fruit and throw it at your swinging corpse. This is the stuff that they say to me. I don't say that stuff, and I don't even think it. I don't be on the other end of the conversation thinking, boy, why, this stupid bitch, wouldn't it be great if she was publicly hanged and I could throw rotten tomatoes at her or something while she's hanging there dying. To me, that would be a dystopian scene. That's the last thing I would want. I wouldn't even go to watch that. If I knew it was happening, I'd stay well away from it. And I would openly speak against it, too. I would say they have no business doing that. And anybody who goes down there and watches that and supports it, is doing wrong. That's what I would say. Yet I got these people wishing that very thing upon me and just reveling in the idea that they're going to go down there and watch that and even participate in some way. And it's like, now to me, that's hatred. I look at that and I say, well, that's real hatred right there. Anyway, bottom line is, it seems that common sense isn't that common anymore. Common courtesy isn't that common anymore. And, it's like you can't disagree with these people without becoming their mortal enemy or something, like having them wish all this awful stuff upon you. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about that, but it's a bit of a rant, I guess, again, but the point is, when my dad said, you can't mess with nature, and that nature won't be having that, like, you want to build your house in a swamp, it doesn't matter how you pretty it up, it's still a swamp, and it always will be, because there's supposed to be a swamp there. Nature has decided that there's supposed to be a swamp there, and there will always be a swamp there. Well, that same logic and reason can be applied to an awful lot of things, and yet it isn't being applied these days, But it should be, because we're sinking fast, We're basically listening to the pretty fiddle music while Rome burns is what we're doing. Anyway, I gotta go. I gotta get myself into town. We'll talk to you later.